The courtroom doors exploded inward like a thunderclap splitting oak. 25 men in leather and steel poured through the threshold booths, hammering against polished marble chains, rattling like wartime cavalry. Behind them, through the tall windows, a line of motorcycles stood, sentinel engines rumbling low and patient, a promise of power held barely in check. At the center of the chaos sat a woman who looked small only to those who didn't know better. Elowen Blackwood, 70 years old. Orange jumpsuit, 2 sizes too large. Wrists bound in steel cuffs that caught the fluorescent light. But her head was not bowed. Her spine was straight as rebar. Her eyes were the color of winter steel, and they were not afraid. The man at the front of the pack was built like he'd been assembled from spare parts and bad decisions. 6'2" leather vest worn soft from years of road salt and desert sun. On his back, embroidered in silver thread that caught the light, President. Steel Covenant MC. Beneath that, a name that didn't match the courthouse records, but matched the woman in orange just fine, Coltrane Blackwood. Behind him came 2 more. One lean and scarred hands, marked with the particular geography of a welder's trade. The other younger, quieter muscles built from years of turning wrenches and swallowing words. Wilder and Rook. Brothers not by blood, but by something stronger. Something forged in kitchens that smelled like yesterday's coffee and unconditional love. The judge, a steel-haired woman named Patricia Holloway, who'd spent 30 years believing she'd seen everything, raised her gavel like a weapon. "Who authorized you people to enter my courtroom?" Colt stepped forward. His voice was gravel and honey, threat and respect mixed in equal measure. "We're family of the accused, Your Honor. We got rights, same as anybody." Judge Holloway's knuckles went white around the gavel. But she didn't bring it down. Because behind the leather and the chains and the deliberate intimidation, there was something else. Something that looked like dignity. Like men who knew exactly how much force they could bring to bear and had chosen very carefully not to. "Sit down," she said. "All of you. And if one person so much as coughs without permission, I'll have you removed in cuffs." They sat. 25 men arranged themselves across the back rows like soldiers at inspection. Silent. Watchful. Waiting. Elowen Blackwood didn't turn around to look at them. She didn't need to. She knew they were there the way a general knows her army, the way a mother knows her sons. 3 weeks earlier, the letter had arrived on a Tuesday. Elowen sat at her kitchen table in the house that had held her life for 40 years. The table was old pine, scarred from decades of homework and spilled coffee and meals, stretched thin to feed growing boys. 3 chairs surrounded it. One was oak ladderback, purchased at a garage sale in 1998, when she didn't have money for new furniture but had a 2-month-old baby who needed a high chair more. One was folding metal stamped with Jefferson Elementary School in faded letters, liberated from the storage closet when the district was throwing them away. The third was a black wooden stool painted with orange flames by a 15-year-old boy who thought he was an artist and turned out to be right. The morning light came through the window above the sink, the one she'd replaced herself in 2003 because the maintenance request had sat on someone's desk for 8 months and winter was coming. Her Carhartt jacket hung on a hook by the door, brown canvas, worn soft-stitched and restitched in a dozen places, stained with decades of floor wax and industrial cleaner and honest work. On the dresser in the hallway, 2 photographs stood in cheap frames. The first showed a young man in army fatigues, square-jawed and serious eyes that hadn't yet seen the things that would close them forever. Daniel Blackwood. K.I. Iraq 2004. 24 years old. Her son. Her first son. The one she'd carried in her body and lost to sand and politics and the kind of sacrifice that left mothers with folded flags and holes in their hearts. The second photograph showed three boys in mismatched clothes standing in front of a Ford pickup that had already been old when she bought it. The tallest had a baby face and suspicious eyes. The middle one was all elbows and ears. The smallest clutched a stuffed rabbit like it might escape. Behind them, barely visible, was Elowen herself. Younger then, tired even then, smiling despite it all. She looked at the letter again. Read it for the fourth time, though the words hadn't changed, and wouldn't change no matter how many times her eyes traced them. Civil complaint. Misappropriation of district resources. The sum of $47,000 over a period of 3 years. Purchase orders bearing her signature. Materials unaccounted for. Theft of public funds. Criminal charges pending. Her name appeared at the top of every page in capital letters like an accusation shouted in print. She looked at her hands. 70 years old and they looked 80. Calluses thick as leather. Scars from box cutters and broken glass and the sharp edges of industrial machinery. A permanent darkness under the nails that no amount of scrubbing could reach. These were the hands of a woman who'd unclogged every toilet in Jefferson Elementary for 34 years, who'd rewired the cafeteria lights when the electrician didn't show, who'd patched the gymnasium roof with materials she bought herself because work orders disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Now these same hands were accused of stealing. The kitchen smelled like yesterday's coffee and this morning's silence. Elowen sat very still. She was good at being still. The army had taught her that. Wait, watch, assess, never panic. Panic got people killed. She picked up her phone, an old flip model because smartphones were for people who had time to learn new tricks and money to waste on monthly plans. She dialed from memory. Colt answered on the second ring. Background noise of engines and men and work being done. Evie, I'm elbows deep in a transmission. What's wrong? She'd never been able to fool him. Not when he was 6 and trying to hide a broken window. Not when he was 16 and pretending the black eye was from sparring. Not now. The district sent some paperwork. It's probably nothing. What kind of nothing? They're saying I took some things from the school. Supplies, equipment. She paused, let the next part land clean. $47,000. Purchase orders with my name on them. The line went quiet, not dead quiet. She could hear him breathing, could hear the click of his jaw as he clenched it, could hear the exact moment he shifted from son to soldier. What things? His voice had changed, flat, dangerous. Floor wax, light fixtures, cleaning supplies, things I order every month. But the numbers are wrong. They're saying I ordered triple what I wrote down, saying I signed for deliveries I never saw. Who filed it? Dixon Pemberton, new superintendent, started last year. Another pause, longer this time. Don't talk to anyone, Colt said. Don't sign anything. Don't even confirm your own name. I'm coming, and I'm bringing the brothers. The line went dead. Elowen set the phone down gently, folded the letter, placed it on the table between the salt and pepper shakers that had been there since 1987. Then she stood, walked to the window, and waited. 20 minutes later, the sound came rolling down Maple Street like distant thunder, deep, rhythmic, the kind of sound that made windows rattle and made people who didn't understand it nervous, the kind of sound that made people who did understand it either very relieved or very concerned, depending on which side of things they stood. 15 motorcycles turned onto her block in formation. Harley-Davidsons, everyone. Not the showroom kind that suburbanites rode on Sundays. These were work bikes, road bikes, machines built for distance and endurance and the kind of life that didn't apologize. They parked in a line along her curb, engines cutting one by one until silence rushed back in to fill the space. 25 men dismounted, some young, some not, all moving with the particular economy of people who'd learned not to waste motion. Colt swung off his bike first, 6'2" in boots broader through the shoulders than he'd been at 20, but moving with the same coiled readiness. His vest was road-worn leather patches accumulated over years. President across the back in silver thread. Steel Covenant MC beneath it in Gothic script. On the front over his heart, a small patch that didn't match the others. It said Mom's Boy. He'd sewn it there himself. Wilder came next, leaner. still moved like a man who expected the floor to give way but had learned to trust it anyway. His hands were marked with the silver scars of hot metal and mist welds. He wore the same vest as Colt, but without the president patch. Instead, road captain, the man who planned routes and kept the pack together. Rook was last off his bike, 22 years old and built like he'd spent his life lifting engines for fun. Quieter than his brothers. Always had been, his patch said simply, prospect. Not a full member yet, still proving himself, still working through whatever it was that made him wake up some nights with his hands in fists. Behind them, the rest of the Steel Covenant MC formed up. Not a gang, that was important. A motorcycle club, registered with the state. They paid taxes, followed laws, held charity rides for children's hospitals and veterans organizations. But they also remembered where they'd come from, and they didn't forget their debts. Elowen opened the door before they could knock. "Kitchen," she said. "I'll make coffee." It was what she always said. What she'd said when Colt was 2 and crying from teething pain. What she'd said when Wilder was 9 and his mother's funeral was the next day. What she'd said when Rook was 8 and showed up at her door with a social worker and eyes that had seen too much. Kitchen, coffee, the universal language of home. They filed in, 25 men in a house built for 4. They filled the kitchen, the living room spilled out onto the porch. Some sat, some stood. All of them watched Elowen with the particular attention of men who'd learned everything worth knowing from the woman making coffee in a pot older than most of them. She poured, passed mugs, didn't bother with cream or sugar because she'd raised them to drink it black. When everyone was settled, when the ritual was complete, she pulled out the letter. Colt read it first. His jaw worked as his eyes moved down the page. Then he passed it to Wilder, who read it twice. Then to Rook, who read it once and set it down like it might bite. 47,000, Colt said. That's what they claim. Over 3 years. That's the timeline. Wilder leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You order supplies every month. I've seen your system. You've got records. 34 years worth. Elowen walked to the hallway closet, opened it. Inside, stacked on shelves like historical archives, were composition notebooks. Dozens of them, black and white marbled covers, dates written in permanent marker on the spines. She pulled out 3 at random, opened the first to a page marked October 1998. Her handwriting filled every line. Neat, precise. The handwriting of a woman who'd learned record keeping in the army where sloppiness got people killed. October 3rd, 1998. 12 gallons floor wax. Industrial grade. Delivered 7:15 a.m. Signed DEM receiving. October 10th, 1998. Replacement ballasts, cafeteria fixtures, quantity 4. Delivered 2:30 p.m. Signed DM receiving. On and on. Every purchase, every delivery, every signature. 34 years of a life measured in mop heads and light bulbs and the quiet dignity of work done right. Cole took the notebook, compared it to the purchase order attached to the lawsuit. October 1998. 30 gallons floor wax. His eyes narrowed. You wrote 12. They claim 30. I know. Wilder grabbed another notebook. November 2001. November 8th, 2001. Ballasts quantity 4. Delivered 8 a.m. The purchase order said 18. Someone changed the numbers, Wilder said. Someone did. Elowen agreed. The room had gone very quiet. 25 men who'd learned to read silence the way sailors read weather. This was the kind of quiet that came before storms. Colt set down the notebook carefully. Tell me about Dixon Pemberton. Elowen poured herself coffee, sat down at her own table, took a sip before answering because she was 70 years old and she'd be damned if she rushed for anyone. Came in as superintendent 18 months ago. Young. 45 maybe. Wears pressed shirts. Drives an Audi. Cut the maintenance budget his first month. Said we were overspending on supplies. You said something. It wasn't a question. Colt knew his mother. I mentioned to Principal Hartley that supplies were running low, even though the budget showed increased spending. Told her the numbers didn't match what I was seeing. Asked if maybe someone should look into it. When, 3 weeks ago, Rook spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, but everyone listened. He filed this 2 weeks after you raised questions. Give or take. The men exchanged looks, a whole conversation happening in glances and small movements. This was the language of people who'd learned to communicate in loud bars and on highways at 70 miles per hour with nothing but hand signals. Colt stood. Tell me about the beginning. How'd we get here? Elowen smiled. Small. Private. The smile of a woman remembering a time when life was simpler and harder, and somehow better for it. Which beginning? There's 3. 26 years ago, Elowen pulled her Ford pickup into the Jefferson Elementary parking lot at 4:30 in the morning. The sky was still dark. The building was a black shape against slightly less black sky. She liked it this way, quiet, empty, before the chaos of children and teachers and all the noise that came with daylight. She was 44 years old, a widow of 3 years, mother of 1 son living, mother of 1 son lost. Daniel had been gone 4 years by then, killed in a place she couldn't find on a map, in a war she didn't understand for reasons nobody could quite explain. The army had sent her a flag and a letter signed by someone who'd never met her boy. She'd put the flag in a box and put the box in a closet and tried very hard not to think about it. Work helped. Work was something you could control. Floors didn't argue. Toilets didn't care about politics. Broken lights either worked or they didn't, and if they didn't, you fixed them. She unlocked the maintenance entrance, flipped on lights as she went. The building came alive in sections, fluorescent tubes, flickering to life with small electric hums. She made her way to the gymnasium, always started there. Big space, easy to see what needed doing. That's when she heard it. Not the wind, not the building settling, not any of the normal sounds that old schools made in the dark hours before dawn. A baby crying. Elowen had been an army medic, had been trained to run towards sounds that made other people run away. So she moved toward the sound without thinking, flashlight in hand, heart already shifting into the gear it had learned in Germany during the Cold War, when crying sometimes meant something worse than hunger. She found the box behind the gymnasium bleachers. Cardboard. The kind that photocopier paper came in. And inside, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days, was a baby. Days old. Maybe a week. Hard to tell. Red-faced from crying. Fists clenched. Furious at a world that had already done him wrong. There was a note. Notebook paper. Handwriting that shook. Please take care of him. I can't. I am sorry. Elowen had been a mother, was a mother still though her son was gone. Her body remembered how to hold a baby, how to cradle a head still soft, how to make those small sounds that mean safety in a language older than words. She picked him up. He was warm, alive. Hers whether anyone else knew it yet or not. Hey there, she said softly. Hey little man, I got you. You're okay now. My name's Elowen. I'm the janitor here. I fix things. Let's get you fixed up. She called the police from the school office. They came with questions and paperwork and a social worker who looked too young to have opinions but had them anyway. We'll need to take him to county services, the social worker said. Her name tag said Melissa. She had kind eyes and a job that would make them hard soon enough. I can take him, Elowen said. Ma'am, there are procedures, foster care, background checks. It's not that simple. I've got a spare room. It was my son's. I've got formula from when my neighbor's baby stayed over. I've got time. I work here so I can keep him with me during the day until things get sorted. The police officer, an older man named Frank, who'd been on the force since before Elowen moved to town, looked at the baby, looked at Elowen, made a decision. Temporarily, he said, until services can do their assessment, but you'll need to file the paperwork. I'll file whatever needs filing. She named him Coltrane, after John Coltrane, because Daniel had loved jazz and because the baby needed a name stronger than his circumstances. For 4 months, Elowen mopped hallways with Coltrane sleeping in a bassinet in her supply closet. The teachers brought clothes their own children had outgrown. The cafeteria cook, a woman named Ruth, who'd worked there longer than Elowen, left extra plates of food with notes that said, "For you and the baby." The social workers did their checks, looked at her bank account and her background and her tiny house, raised eyebrows at her age, her income, her status as a single woman working a custodian's wage. But Coltrane thrived, gained weight, smiled, grabbed at Elowen's fingers with the grip of someone who'd found an anchor. When the judge asked why she wanted to adopt him, Elowen said it plain. "He needs someone. I'm here. That's enough." The judge, a woman named Hendricks, who'd seen enough bad outcomes to recognize a good one, granted custody. Elowen raised Coltrane the way she'd been raised, the way the army had trained her, with discipline, with expectations, with the understanding that life was hard and you either learned to match that hardness or you got crushed beneath it. She taught him to change his own oil at 6, showed him how a socket wrench worked and why maintaining things mattered, to fix a broken window at 8 measuring glass and setting glazing points with hands too small but learning anyway, to stand up when he got knocked down and understand that getting back up was the only response that mattered. When he was 17 and decided school wasn't for him, Elowen didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't lecture about wasted potential or disappointed expectations, just looked at him across the kitchen table and said what needed saying. "Life will teach you. It won't be gentle. Come home when you're ready to learn different." He left, joined the Steel Covenant MC, found brothers who understood the particular shape of his anger, men who'd also grown up knowing the system wasn't built for people like them, found work that valued hands over diplomas, skills over certificates, found himself eventually, though it took longer than either of them would have liked. When he turned 21 and they made him president, he came home, walked into the kitchen where Elowen was washing dishes, the same dishes she'd been washing for 20 years. Knelt down in front of her leather vest, creaking chain wallet, clinking against the linoleum. "You taught me how to stand up," he said. "I'm standing. I need you to be proud of that." She dried her hands on the same dish towel she'd used since he was 2, touched his face. This boy who wasn't her blood but was her son in every way that mattered, every way that counted. "I've always been proud. Now get up. Men don't kneel in my kitchen unless they're fixing the cabinet." But she'd smiled when she said it, and he'd known. 6 years after Colt came into her life, Wilder arrived differently, not in a box, not abandoned, but lost all the same. His mother Lorraine worked double shifts at the Route 40 diner, breakfast service starting at 5 a.m., then back again for dinner rush at 4 p.m. 5 days a week, sometimes 6 when the bills piled higher than usual. She walked Wilder to school every morning at 7:15, her waitress uniform already on, smelling like coffee and maple syrup. Picked him up every afternoon at 3:30 between shifts. In between, the boy was on his own. At 6 years old, Wilder had learned to entertain himself, learned to be quiet, learned to take up as little space as possible. He'd appear at Elowen's custodial closet around 3:15, after the final bell, but before his mother's shift ended. He'd sit on an overturned bucket, small legs dangling eat crackers from the sleeve Elowen kept specifically for him, and do his homework with a pencil that was mostly eraser and hope. Elowen never minded. She'd lost one son to a war that didn't need him, was raising another who'd been thrown away like trash, had room in her heart and her closet for a quiet boy who did his math problems in careful numbers and didn't ask for much beyond company and crackers and a safe place to exist for 90 minutes. Lorraine knew. Never said anything directly, but she'd slip Elowen $20 every month in an envelope with a note that said, for the crackers. Elowen would slip it back in Lorraine's coat pocket when she wasn't looking. They had an understanding. They were both women doing what needed doing with whatever they had. December 2009. Ice storm. The kind that turned Interstate 40 into a skating rink and made every drive a gamble with physics and luck. Lorraine's dinner shift ended at 10. She left the diner at 10:15, tipped out, exhausted, probably thinking about the boy waiting at home with a neighbor. Lost control of her 12-year-old Honda Civic at 10:40 on Highway 9, 2 miles from the house she rented, 3 miles from safety. The police found Elowen's number in Lorraine's phone under School Lady Who Watches W. They called at 11:30, asked if she could come to the hospital, asked if she knew next of kin, asked if she could maybe identify the body because Lorraine's face was too damaged from going through the windshield and they needed someone who knew her to confirm. Elowen went, looked at what was left of a woman who'd worked herself to death trying to give her son a better life than she'd had, identified her, stayed while they called Lorraine's mother in Tennessee, who hadn't spoken to her daughter in 6 years over some argument nobody remembered and wasn't about to start caring now that she was dead. Then she went to the school. It was past midnight, but she had keys. Had keys to every door in Jefferson Elementary because that was her job. She found Wilder asleep in the principal's office, curled up in a chair designed for adults, clutching his backpack like it might run away, like it was the last solid thing in a world that had just collapsed. The social worker on duty. A different one this time. A tired woman named Sharon, who'd been doing this job too long to have illusions, said they'd found a foster placement. Temporary, until family could be located or until the system ground through whatever process it ground through to figure out what happened to children nobody wanted. Elowen looked at Wilder, 9 years old, mother dead on a highway, father unknown, never listed on any paperwork. Grandmother unwilling made that clear in a phone call that lasted 30 seconds. The system about to chew him up and spit him out in pieces the way it did with children who had no advocates. "He can stay with me," she said. "Ma'am, you already have a son, and according to our records, you're not on the approved foster list for additional placements. Then approve me, or don't. But he's not going anywhere tonight. Not to some stranger's house, not to wake up in a place he doesn't know with people he's never met on the worst night of his life." Something in her voice made the social worker pause. Maybe it was the tone that said this wasn't negotiable. Maybe it was the look in her eyes that had seen enough death to know what mattered. Maybe it was just that Sharon was tired and it was midnight and sometimes you bent the rules because the rules were stupid. They let him stay, temporarily, while the paperwork processed, while the system ground through its gears at the speed of bureaucracy, which was slower than geology. Wilder didn't speak for 2 weeks. Not a word. Not to Elowen, not to Colt, who tried to engage him with motorcycle magazines and stories about the club. Not to the school counselor who came to talk about grief. He ate when food was put in front of him, did his homework in the same careful numbers, went to bed when told. But he didn't speak. Until one morning, standing in the kitchen while Elowen made oatmeal, the way she made it every morning, steel-cut oats, brown sugar raisins. He asked the question that was eating him alive from the inside. "How do you know I'll be okay?" Elowen turned off the stove, set down the wooden spoon she'd used for 20 years, looked at him. This boy with his mother's eyes and his own private war that he was too young to fight alone. "Because I'm going to make sure of it. Promise. Promise," he cried then. First time since his mother died. Cried until Elowen held him, this boy who wasn't hers by blood, but was hers by choice, hers by necessity, hers because no one else would be, and someone had to be. The adoption went through faster the second time. Elowen knew the system now, knew the forms, knew which judge to request, which social worker to work with, which arguments worked and which didn't. knew that being a single woman with a limited income didn't matter as much as being a woman who showed up and kept showing up. She raised Wilder the way she'd raised Colt, with expectations and standards and the understanding that the world didn't care about your feelings about your dead mother, about your absent father. The world cared about what you could do, and whether you could do it when things got hard. She taught him to weld at 10, bought a second-hand torch from a pawn shop, set up a space in the garage, showed him that metal was honest in ways people weren't. That heat and pressure could join things that seemed separate, that with enough skill and patience you could make strong things from broken pieces. That transformation was possible if you were willing to do the work. He learned, got good. Good enough that by 18, he was working full-time at Cordell's fabrication, making more per hour than his mother ever had at the diner building, things that would outlast him. The first thing he bought with his first real paycheck wasn't a car or new clothes or any of the things 18-year-olds usually wanted. It was a truck, used. A 2005 Ford F-150 with 140,000 miles and a transmission that would need replacing in a year. But it ran. He drove it to Elowen's house on a Saturday morning and handed her the keys. "You sold yours to feed us," he said. "Seemed fair to return the favor." She kept that truck for 10 years, drove it until the transmission finally gave up the way the dealer had predicted. Never told Wilder that she'd cried the first time she started it, sitting in the driveway, thinking about a boy who remembered debts and paid them when he didn't have to. Rook was the third, the last, the one who almost didn't make it. Summer 2010. June heat that made asphalt soft and made teachers grateful for summer vacation. The school was empty except for Elowen, who used summers to do the deep cleaning that couldn't happen during the school year. Stripping and rewaxing floors, painting classrooms, replacing ceiling tiles, the work that kept a building alive. She found him on a Tuesday afternoon, behind the boiler in the basement, a space so hot and tight that no reasonable person would choose to be there, a space you went to when you were hiding from something worse than heat. But Rook wasn't there by choice. 8 years old, long sleeves in 90-degree heat, bruises on his arms dark enough to see through the fabric, more bruises on his neck barely visible above the collar, eyes that looked at Elowen like she might hit him, and he was already bracing for the impact, already making himself small. She didn't hit him, didn't yell, didn't grab, didn't do any of the things that adults had apparently been doing to this child. She sat down on the concrete floor, making herself smaller, making herself less threatening, made herself into something that might be safe. "Hey, sweetheart, you okay?" He didn't answer, just watched her with eyes that had learned not to trust. "You don't have to talk, that's fine, but it's real hot down here, probably 100 degrees, and I've got water upstairs. Cold water from the fridge. You want some?" He shook his head, small movement, barely there. "Okay, that's okay. I'm gonna sit here with you if that's all right, just to make sure you're safe, just to keep you company. You don't have to talk, you don't have to do anything, just exist. That's enough." She sat. Minutes turned into an hour. The boiler roared. Sweat ran down her back, soaked through her shirt. But she didn't move, didn't rush him, just existed in the same space, proving through presence that not all adults were dangerous. Finally he spoke, voice like gravel and fear and something breaking. "Are you gonna call them?" "Call who, honey?" "The people, the ones who take kids away." "Do you want me to call them?" He thought about it, really thought, like it was a test with wrong answers, like every question was a trap. "I don't want to go back there." "Where's there?" "The house, where they put me, where Mr. and Mrs. Brennan are. Foster care." She knew without asking. Knew from the bruises and the fear and the way he flinched when she shifted her weight. Knew from 20 years of seeing children who carried damage they were too young to name. "Okay," she said. "Okay. How about this? How about you come upstairs with me? Get some water. Maybe some food. And we'll figure out what's next. Together. I promise I won't send you back there." Whatever happens, you're not going back there. He followed her up the stairs, slowly, watching her every move, drank water from a paper cup, ate a sandwich she made from supplies in the break room fridge, didn't say much, didn't need to. She called the hotline, the number every mandated reporter knew, reported what she'd seen, gave her name and number, told them she'd wait with him until someone came because he was a child and he was scared and he deserved someone to stay. They came. Different social worker, different officers. Same system that created this in the first place. They took Rook to a hospital, documented injuries that made the intake nurse cry, took photographs that would later be used in a criminal trial, built a case that would eventually put 2 people in prison for what they'd done to children who had no power. The foster parents were arrested within 48 hours, charged, eventually convicted. The system worked for once, though it had failed first by placing him there. But Rook wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, sat in the temporary placement and stared at walls and waited for the next bad thing because bad things always came. Until they brought him to Elowen. She was on the approved foster list by then, had 2 sons already, had a system that worked, had a track record, had room for one more child who needed not to be given up on. They brought him on a Friday afternoon. He walked into her house carrying nothing. No clothes, no toys, no belongings. Just a garbage bag with whatever the temporary placement had given him. He looked around like he was cataloging exits, escape routes, weapons, threats. Elowen showed him his room, Daniel's old room, Colt's first room, Wilder's after that. The room that seemed to exist specifically for boys who needed saving, though she'd never thought of it that way. Just a room, just a bed, just a space. "This is yours," she said, "long as you need it. Could be a week, could be a year, could be forever. That's up to you and the courts and how things work out. But while you're here, it's yours. Nobody's gonna hurt you here. That's a promise I can keep." He looked at the bed, the dresser, the window that looked out on the backyard where Colt and Wilder were working on a motorcycle engine, teaching themselves mechanics through trial and error. Can I stay forever? The question was small, scared. The question of a boy who'd learned that forever was a lie that adults told but wanted to believe anyway, wanted it so badly it hurt. "Yeah," Elowen said. "Yeah, you can." He cried then. She held him. This boy who wasn't hers except he was. Who'd been broken by people who should have protected him. Who'd survived anyway because children survive things they shouldn't have to. She raised him different than the others. Gentler, with more patience and fewer expectations initially. He needed time to learn that not all adults hurt, that home could be safe, that love didn't come with conditions or violence or the threat of either. She taught him to work with his hands like the others. Engines instead of welding. Taught him that machines made sense when people didn't, that you could take something broken and make it run again if you were patient enough, careful enough, willing to understand how the pieces fit together. He learned slowly, carefully, never quite lost the wariness that came from learning young that the world was dangerous. But he learned to smile, to laugh, to trust that when Elowen said she'd be there, she would be. That promises from her mouth meant something. By 22, he was working at Cordell's fabrication with Wilder, rebuilding engines, making decent money, building a life that didn't include fear as its foundation. And when Colt started the Steel Covenant MC, when he needed members who understood loyalty, Rook was the first to prospect, the first to earn his patch through work and dedication, the first to prove that broken things could be made strong again if someone cared enough to do the work. Back in the present, the kitchen had become a war room. 25 men who'd spent their lives on the margins of society, who'd learned to read people better than books, who knew the difference between justice and law, sat watching a 70-year-old woman organize her defense with the precision of a field commander. Elowen spread the notebooks across the table. 34 years of her life in black and white composition books. Every purchase, every delivery, every signature. A paper trail that stretched back before most of these men were born. Colt picked up a notebook from 2022, compared it to a purchase order from the lawsuit. His finger traced the lines comparing numbers that should have matched but didn't. October 2022. You wrote down 8 gallons of floor wax. The purchase order says 40. I know. November, you wrote 6 replacement bulbs. They claim 32. I know. Wilder pulled another notebook, flipped through pages. This is systematic. Every order's been inflated, 3 times the actual amount. 4 times someone's been skimming the difference. Someone's been doing this for a while, said a man from the back. His name was Kane, Sergeant at Arms of the Steel Covenant. Former Army intelligence before the Army decided they didn't need him anymore discharged him with the general under honorable conditions and no explanation. He'd brought a laptop, already had it open. You said the superintendent's name was Dixon Pemberton. That's right. And he started when? 18 months ago, February of last year. Kane's fingers moved across the keyboard with the speed of someone who'd spent years finding information people tried to hide. The room stayed quiet while he worked. These men knew how to wait, how to let the smart guy do his thing, while everyone else kept their mouths shut and their eyes open and their hands ready. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The only sounds were Kane's typing and the occasional shift of weight on old floorboards. Then Kane leaned back, stared at his screen, and said a word that made 2 of the younger guys flinch. Found it. Every inflated order was fulfilled by the same company, Silverline Supplies, registered as an LLC in Delaware 18 months ago, right when Pemberton took over as superintendent. That's not coincidence, Rook said quietly. No, it's not. And here's the interesting part. Registered agent is listed as Howard Grayfield, address in Riverside, filed taxes last year, gross revenue of $420,000. The name meant nothing to most of them, meant something to Kane, who'd already traced it 3 steps further. Dixon Pemberton's brother-in-law, married to his wife's younger sister Sharon, got a sheet, minor fraud conviction in 2012 credit card scam, did 6 months at county, clean since then, or smart enough not to get caught. Elowen stood very still. Her face showed nothing but Colt knew that stillness. Had seen it before when she was calculating something, when her mind was working 3 moves ahead. It was the stillness of a woman assessing angles and outcomes and the exact amount of force required to break something that needed breaking. Show me the numbers, she said. Kane turned the laptop around, pulled up a spreadsheet he'd built from public records and some records that weren't quite as public, that required knowing where to look and how to access databases that weren't meant for public consumption. Purchase orders on one side, market prices for the same items on the other. The difference highlighted in red. A case of industrial floor wax that should cost $40 was billed at $120. Industrial light bulbs worth $15 each showed up at $45. Cleaning supplies, maintenance equipment, replacement parts, small purchases that individually didn't raise flags but added up month after month after month into something that mattered. Over 3 years, Kane said, scrolling through the spreadsheet, I'm seeing roughly $340,000 in inflated billing. $47,000 is just what they're blaming you for. The rest went somewhere else. The room went silent. The kind of silent that happens when men who've seen bad things realize they're looking at something worse than they thought. Something calculated. Something that required planning. He's not stealing $47,000, Colt said, slowly working through the logic. He's stealing $340,000, and he's framing you to cover his tracks, to make sure nobody looks deeper. Elowen nodded, like she'd already worked this out in the hours between receiving the letter and calling her son. Like she'd been waiting for someone else to say it out loud so she'd know she wasn't imagining it. He filed the lawsuit to ruin my credibility. If I'm a thief, nothing I say matters. When someone notices the money's missing, I'm the obvious suspect. I've already been convicted in the court of public opinion. Easier to believe the janitor stole than the man in the suit. That's smart, Wilder said. Cold, but smart. He made one mistake, though, Elowen said. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made everyone pay attention. Something that sounded like a promise or a threat, or both. What's that? he picked the wrong woman to frame. For the first time since reading the letter, Elowen Blackwood smiled. Not a nice smile, not a warm one, not the smile she gave to children or her sons or people she cared about. This was the smile of a woman who'd spent 70 years learning how the world worked and had just decided to use that knowledge as a weapon. "They think I'm just a janitor," she said. "They think I'm old and scared and easy to break, that I'll take a plea deal to avoid prison, that I'll go quietly. They're wrong on all 3 counts. They don't know what I am, and they're about to find out." Colt stood, looked at his brothers, at the men who'd followed him here on 20 minutes' notice because family called, at the woman who'd taught all of them what family meant when the world had given up on teaching them. "What do you need? Time, information, and for you boys to be exactly who you are, exactly what you've become. We're good at that. I know, that's why I raised you this way." The planning took most of the night. Men came and went as shifts ended and began. Phones were called. Favors were asked from people who owed them or remembered kindness or just didn't like seeing old women get railroaded by men in suits who thought being educated meant being smart. The network that existed in the spaces between legal and not quite spread out across 3 counties. Mechanics who knew which cars belonged to which people. Bartenders who heard things. County clerks who had access to records. People who existed in the margins, but saw everything because nobody noticed them. By morning, they had a plan. Not a good plan. Not a safe plan. Not the kind of plan lawyers would approve of. But a plan. Colt would handle Pemberton directly. Background, history, anything that might show a pattern of behavior. People who'd worked with him before. Places he'd been, money he'd spent. Wilder would find the whistleblower, someone inside the school system who'd seen something, known something, been too scared to speak, but might find courage with the right push, the right protection. Rook would stay with Elowen, not because she needed protection from physical threats, because she needed a witness, someone who could testify that she never ran, never hid, never acted like a woman with something to hide. And Elowen herself would do what she'd always done. Work, document, wait for the system to make its move so she could counter it, play defense until it was time to play offense. The arrest came on a Wednesday morning, 6 a.m. exactly. 3 police cars and a warrant signed by a judge who'd never met Elowen Blackwood, but had read a very convincing affidavit from a superintendent with pressed shirts and credentials and the backing of the school board. Elowen was making coffee when they knocked. She'd been awake since 4:30, same as every morning for 34 years. Body didn't know how to sleep past that anymore. She opened the door before they could knock twice, looked at the officers with the calm of someone who'd been expecting this. "Miss Elowen Blackwood, that's right. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement and theft of public funds. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." They read her the rest of the Miranda warning. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't argue. When they were done, she held out her wrists. "I'll need to turn off the coffee pot first." "Ma'am, we need to do this now." "Officer, I've been making coffee in that pot for 20 years. It's older than your car. If I don't turn it off, it might burn my house down. Unless you want to add arson to whatever you're charging me with, give me 30 seconds. The lead officer, a younger man named Torres, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, nodded. Followed her to the kitchen. Watched while she turned off the pot. Hung her Carhartt jacket on its hook with care. Left a note on the table in handwriting that hadn't changed in 34 years. "Gone to handle business. Back soon. Don't worry." She signed it. "Mom." They cuffed her gently. Torres had a mother, had a grandmother, knew how to treat a 70-year-old woman with dignity even when you were arresting her. Walked her to the car while neighbors started coming out of houses. Started staring. Started whispering. Elowen kept her head up, her spine straight. Gave them nothing to whisper about except the fact that she looked more dignified in handcuffs than most people looked in Sunday clothes. Looked like someone who'd done nothing wrong and knew it. Rook's motorcycle roared to life 3 houses down. He'd been waiting since 5 a.m. watching. Ready. He followed the police cars at a careful distance, not close enough to interfere or give them reason to stop him, close enough to bear witness, close enough to know where they took her. At the station, they processed her through the system that processed everyone the same way, regardless of who they were or what they'd done. Fingerprints, photographs from 3 angles. The machinery of justice grinding a woman who'd never been arrested, never been in trouble, never been anything but exactly what she appeared to be. They put her in a holding cell, concrete walls painted institutional beige, metal bench bolted to the floor, toilet in the corner with no seat. The kind of place designed to break people down, make them small, make them confess to things they didn't do just to get out. Elowen sat on the bench, folded her hands in her lap, waited. She was good at waiting, had been waiting her whole life for various things. For Daniel to come home from war, for social workers to make decisions, for boys to learn to trust her. Waiting was just another form of work. An hour later, Dixon Pemberton arrived. She heard him before she saw him, that particular cadence of expensive shoes on tile floors. The sound of a man who'd never questioned whether doors would open for him, whether people would listen, whether he deserved the space he took up. He appeared at her cell. 45 years old. Handsome in the way of men who'd never been hit hard enough to rearrange their features or their worldview. Suit that cost more than Elowen made in a month. Watch that cost more than her truck. Tie that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. He smiled. The smile of someone who thought they'd already won, who thought this was over before it started. Miss Blackwood, I'm sorry it came to this, I really am. Elowen looked at him, really looked. The way a medic looks at a patient assessing damage and prognosis, cataloging weaknesses, finding the places that would break first under pressure. Are you? Of course, you've been with the district for so long, such dedicated service. It's disappointing that you felt the need to steal from the children, from the very people you were supposed to serve. How long have you been doing this, Mr. Pemberton? His smile flickered, just for a second, just long enough for Elowen to see that she'd hit something true, something he hadn't expected her to know. Doing what? Stealing, skimming, whatever you call it when you take money that's not yours and blame someone else. Setting up shell companies, inflating purchase orders, taking from children and teachers and putting it in your pocket. I have no idea what you're talking about. The evidence is very clear. You signed fraudulent purchase orders. The materials never arrived. The money is gone. That's theft, Miss Blackwood. Simple theft. Yes, you do know what I'm talking about. You've been doing it long enough to get good at it, long enough to set up shell companies and fake invoices and systems that look legitimate until someone actually checks, until someone who knows the real numbers compares them to your fake ones. How many districts have you done this to? How many custodians did you frame before me? His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder, harder, more honest. You're confused, old. Probably don't even remember what you signed. The evidence is very clear, Miss Blackwood. You stole $47,000 over 3 years. You'll be convicted. You'll go to prison. And no one will believe anything you say because you're a thief. A desperate old woman who betrayed the trust placed in her. Elowen stood, walked to the bars, looked Dixon Pemberton in the eyes with the gaze of a woman who'd seen men die and live and make every choice in between. Who'd seen what men were capable of and wasn't impressed by suits or titles or the ability to lie convincingly. I know what you're doing. I can't prove it yet, but I will. And when I do, you're going to learn something important about the world. What's that? That underestimating old women is the last mistake young men make. That stealing from people who have nothing left to lose is dangerous, that I've spent 70 years learning how to fight and I haven't forgotten how. He laughed, actually laughed. The sound echoed off concrete walls and came back hollow. You're 70 years old. You make $12 an hour. You have no lawyer, no resources, no power, no connections. What exactly do you think you're going to do? Mount some kind of crusade? You're nobody, Miss Blackwood. Just a janitor, just an old woman who's about to learn that the system doesn't care about you. Whatever it takes, whatever needs doing, you picked the wrong person. You thought I'd be easy, thought I'd be too old, too tired, too scared to fight back. You were wrong, and that mistake is going to cost you everything. He shook his head, turned to leave, stopped at the door, looked back over his shoulder with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from never having consequences. You should have just stayed quiet, kept your head down, finished out your years and retired, gone quietly into whatever old women go into. Now you're going to die in prison. That's on you, Miss Blackwood. That's your choice. You could have made this easy. He left, footsteps fading, door closing, silence settling back in like dust. Elowen sat down, took a breath, let it out slow. Centered herself the way she'd learned in the army when panic wasn't an option and fear would get you killed. From the cell next to hers, a voice spoke, rough, female, the voice of someone who'd spent time in places like this and learned the language. That man's got it coming. Yes, Elowen said quietly. Yes, he does. You gonna give it to him? Yes. Good. System needs more women like you, women who fight back. The bail hearing happened that afternoon. Elowen stood in orange hands, cuffed while a public defender she'd never met and would never meet again argued for reasonable bail. The prosecutor, a woman who looked tired and overworked and out of patience with everything, argued she was a flight risk. Had worked at the school for decades, knew the building, could destroy evidence, had no ties to the community despite living there for 40 years. The judge, a man who'd been on the bench long enough to have seen this exact scenario play out 100 times with 100 different faces, set bail at $50,000. Elowen's heart sank. She didn't have $50,000, didn't have $5,000, had maybe $800 in her savings account and a truck that was worth less than that and a house that was paid off but would take months to sell if she could even bring herself to do it. The gavel came down. They started to lead her away, back to the cells, back to concrete and metal and waiting. That's when the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Colt walked in first. Behind him, 24 more men. Steel Covenant MC in full colors, leather and patches, and the weight of men who decided something mattered. They filled the gallery, stood in a line like soldiers at attention, silent, watchful. Colt approached the bench with the kind of deliberate movement that made people nervous and careful. Your Honor, I'm here to post bail for my mother. The judge looked at him, at the leather, at the patches, at the very clear statement being made about who these people were and what they were willing to do. You have the funds. Yes, sir, cash. He pulled out an envelope. Not a bank envelope, just a manila envelope that had been sitting on someone's desk. Counted out $50,000 in hundreds on the judge's bench. Bills that had been gathered from 25 men in 6 hours. Some from savings accounts that were supposed to be for emergencies. Some from selling motorcycles and tools and things that could be replaced. All of it given freely for a woman who'd taught them that family wasn't blood. It was choice. It was showing up. The judge counted it. Twice. Nodded to the clerk. Bail is posted. Ms. Blackwood, you are free to go pending trial. You are not to leave the county. You are to appear at all scheduled hearings. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. They removed her cuffs, gave her back her belongings in a manila envelope, a wallet with $16, keys to a house that had been home to broken boys and second chances. A wedding ring she still wore 23 years after her husband died because some promises you kept even when the person was gone. She walked out of the courthouse between her sons. Colt on one side, Wilder on the other. Rook behind her like a rear guard. 25 motorcycles started in sequence outside. The sound was thunder, was warning, was a promise being kept. They rode home in formation. Elowen in Colt's truck because she didn't have a bike and wouldn't have ridden one if she did. The motorcycles surrounded them like an honor guard, like cavalry escorting someone important. Like exactly what they were, men who remembered their debts and paid them in full, even when it cost them. At home, the work continued. While Elowen tried to rest, tried to process what was happening, Wilder was already moving. He'd found his target, a woman named Briar Ashford, 28 years old, accountant for the school district, hired 8 months ago fresh out of state college with a degree in accounting and ideas about how things should work. Smart enough to notice discrepancies, scared enough to keep quiet. He found her at a coffee shop on Thursday morning, the kind of place where young professionals worked on laptops and pretended the coffee was worth $6, sat down across from her without asking permission or waiting for invitation. Ms. Ashford, my name's Wilder Blackwood. I need 5 minutes of your time. She looked up from her laptop, saw him, saw the scars on his hands from years of hot metal, saw the MC patch on his vest that said he belonged to something most people cross the street to avoid, started to stand. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to ask for help. I don't know you. No, but you know my mother. Elowen Blackwood works at Jefferson Elementary. Just got arrested yesterday for stealing $47,000 she didn't take. Briar went very still. The kind of still that meant she knew more than she was saying. The kind of still that came from having information you wished you didn't have. I can't help you. I'm sorry. I really am. But I can't. Can't or won't. Both. I have a job. I have 2 kids, 6 and 4. I'm a single mother. I can't afford to lose either one. Do you understand what I'm saying? Wilder leaned back in his chair, studied her, saw the fear underneath the professional demeanor, saw the guilt that came from knowing something was wrong and doing nothing. You found something, didn't you, in the books, something that didn't add up, numbers that were wrong. I don't know what you're talking about. You told Pemberton, thought he'd want to know, thought he'd fix it. He threatened you instead. Said you'd lose your job if you kept digging, said maybe worse than that, maybe something about your kids, about custody, about things a single mother can't afford to risk. Her hands shook, just slightly, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. I have to go. My mother is 70 years old. She raised 3 kids who weren't hers on $12 an hour, sold her truck to afford food for us. Wore the same jacket for 20 years, because new ones cost money we didn't have. She never took a thing that wasn't hers. Never asked for help she didn't need. Never complained about how hard it was. And now she's going to prison because a man in a suit decided she was easy to frame. Because she's old and poor, and he thought nobody would care. I'm sorry, I really am, but I can't help. I have kids to think about. Wilder stood, dropped a card on the table. His number written in the same careful handwriting Elowen had taught him when he was 10, teaching him that clear communication mattered. When you're ready to do the right thing, call that number. We'll protect you, all of us, your job, your kids, whatever you need. That's a promise I can keep. My mother taught me to keep promises. He left. Briar sat staring at the card for 20 minutes, thinking about her daughters. Thinking about what she wanted to teach them about courage and integrity and doing the right thing when it cost you something. The call came 3 days later. Sunday morning, Elowen was in the kitchen making breakfast for sons who'd been camping in her living room like it was a siege, like they expected someone to come through the door at any moment. Her phone rang, the old flip phone that barely worked. Unknown number. Hello. Ms. Blackwood, this is Briar Ashford. I'm the district accountant. I think we need to talk. They met at the house an hour later. Briar came alone looking like she might bolt at any second, looking like this was the worst decision she'd ever made and maybe the best. Elowen sat her down at the kitchen table, made tea, waited. Sometimes people needed time to find their courage. I found discrepancies 6 months ago, Briar said finally. Right after I started, purchase orders that didn't match invoices, amounts that seemed high for basic supplies. I ran an unofficial audit on my own time, found a pattern. Silverline Supplies. Yes, every inflated order went through them. I traced the company, found the registration in Delaware, found Howard Grayfield's name on the paperwork, found his connection to Pemberton. His wife's sister is married to Grayfield. You told Pemberton. I thought it was a mistake, an honest mistake. Thought he'd want to know someone was overcharging us. I was stupid. What did he say? That I was new, that I didn't understand how school budgets worked, that vendors charged what they charged and it wasn't my job to question it. that if I kept making accusations without proof, I'd find myself unemployed and possibly facing legal action for defamation. He was very clear, very calm. That made it worse somehow. The calmness, like he'd said this before. Elowen reached across the table, took Briar's hand in her own scarred, calloused one. The hand of someone who'd done hard work for a long time. You have kids. 2 daughters, 6 and 4. They're everything. You were scared for them. Yes. Scared I'd lose my job, scared I couldn't pay rent, scared their father would use it in custody court. Scared of everything. That's not stupid. That's being a mother, protecting your kids. But those kids need more than a paycheck, Briar. They need to see you do the right thing even when it's hard, even when it costs you. That's the lesson that matters. Briar's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for months. He'll destroy me. He has lawyers, he has power. He'll make sure I never work again. Not if we destroy him first. Not if we take away his power before he can use it. I don't have proof, just printouts, records I shouldn't have copied, files I accessed when I wasn't supposed to. How many records? 200 pages, purchase orders, invoices, payment records, bank transfers, everything from the last 3 years showing the pattern. Colt stepped forward from where he'd been standing by the door. That's enough. That's more than enough. We just need you to testify, to stand up in court and tell the truth. In court? Yes. He'll have lawyers, good ones, expensive ones. They'll tear me apart. They'll make me look like I'm lying or incompetent or both. Elowen stood, walked around the table, knelt down so she was eye level with this young woman who was trying so hard to be brave to do the right thing when every instinct said, run. I raised 3 boys who the world threw away, boys the system gave up on, taught them to stand up when everything said to stay down, taught them that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. You can do this. You're stronger than you think, and you won't be alone. We'll be there, all of us. Briar looked around the room, at Colt and Wilder and Rook, at 22 more men who'd appeared like they'd been summoned, filling the small house with their presence, at a 70-year-old woman who looked like she could stare down the devil and make him blink first. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll do it. For my daughters, so they know their mother stood up. That night, they spread Briar's documents across every available surface in Elowen's house. Purchase orders on the left. Invoices on the right, market prices for comparison in the middle, the dining table, the coffee table, the kitchen counters, papers everywhere. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Obvious, damning. But Kane found something else, something worse. This is bigger than supply fraud, he said, pointing to a spreadsheet that Briar had flagged but not fully understood, hadn't had the context to recognize. This is a transfer log. Money being moved from one account to another in small increments. Which accounts? Teacher Retirement Fund, $2.1 million total, being transferred in increments of $10,000 over the past 18 months to 5 different shell companies registered in Delaware. Same pattern as the supplies. Small enough not to trigger automatic reviews. Large enough to add up to something that matters. The room went silent. The kind of silence that happens when men who've seen bad things realize they're looking at something that crosses a line even they wouldn't cross. He's not just stealing from supplies, Wilder said slowly, working through the implications. He's stealing retirement money. From teachers who've worked 30 years for poverty wages, Colt added. From people who have nothing else, Rook finished. People who've given their whole lives and this is all they get. Elowen walked to the window, looked out at the street where she'd lived for 40 years, where she'd raised boys and buried a husband and built a life from broken pieces and stubbornness. Behind her on the dresser in the hallway, the photograph of Daniel stared out from its frame. 24 years old forever. Dead in Iraq for reasons that seemed important to politicians and meaningless to mothers. She'd lost one son to a system that sent boys to die for oil and politics and things that didn't matter. She wouldn't lose her freedom to a system that let men in suits steal from teachers who'd given their lives to children. She turned back to the room, to her sons, to the men who'd become family because family was something you built with choices and actions, not something you were born into. We can't use this in court. The retirement fund information came from hacking. It's inadmissible. A good lawyer will get it thrown out and probably get us charged. So what do? Colt asked. We make him confess. We make him so angry he makes mistakes. We push him until he breaks. How? Elowen smiled, the same smile from before, the one that wasn't nice or warm or comforting, the one that said she'd spent 70 years learning how power worked and was about to teach a master class in using it against itself. By making him angry. Angry men make mistakes. Men who think they're smarter than everyone else can't resist proving it. And Dixon Pemberton is about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The school board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday night. Public forum, open to anyone who wanted to speak. First come, first served for comment slots. Elowen signed up online to address the board under the public comment section. Number 3 on the list. Dixon Pemberton would be there, had to be. It was his job to attend board meetings, to report on district operations, to answer questions. Elowen dressed carefully that night, deliberately, not in her work clothes, not in the Carhartt jacket and canvas pants that marked her as labor as someone who worked with her hands. She wore a dress. Simple. Navy blue. The one she'd worn to Daniel's funeral. The one she'd worn to court appearances for adoptions. The one that said she was a mother and a veteran's widow and someone who deserved respect regardless of what she did for $12 an hour. Colt drove her to the school. Behind them, 25 motorcycles followed in perfect formation. Military precision. They parked outside Jefferson Elementary, filled the lot, made a statement that couldn't be ignored by anyone paying attention. Inside the boardroom was packed. 200 people at least. Teachers who'd taken time off from second jobs to be there. Parents who'd heard something was happening. Community members who sensed drama. Everyone wanted to watch. Dixon sat at the board table with 4 other board members. Saw Elowen enter. Saw the men behind her filling the back of the room. His face went tight, pale. He hadn't expected this. When her turn came, when the board chairman called her name from the list, Elowen walked to the podium with her head high. Looked at the board. At Dixon specifically. At the audience of people who knew her or knew of her. My name is Elowen Blackwood. I've worked for this district for 34 years. I've cleaned every floor in this building more times than I can count. Fixed every light. Unclogged every toilet, painted every classroom at least twice. I've done it for $12 an hour and never once complained because it was honest work and I'm proud of honest work. She paused. Let that sink in. Let people remember who she was. 2 weeks ago, I was accused of stealing $47,000. Purchase orders with my signature. Materials I supposedly ordered but never received. The superintendent says I'm a thief who betrayed the trust of this community. Dixon started to stand. The board chairman, a man named Gerald Worth, who'd been on the board for 15 years, waved him down. This was public comment. Dixon would get his turn. I'm not here to defend myself. The courts will handle that. I'm here to ask a question. To ask it publicly so everyone can hear the answer. She turned to Dixon, looked him directly in the eyes. Mr. Pemberton, you drive an Audi A6. I know because I see it in your parking spot every morning when I arrive. That's a $60,000 car. You make $95,000 a year as superintendent. After taxes, that's about $70,000. You've been here 18 months. Where did the money for that car come from? That's none of your business. That's personal financial information. You made my finances your business when you accused me of theft. Seems fair to return the favor. Answer the question. Where did you get the money? The room murmured, people leaning forward, paying attention now. Dixon's face flushed red. I bought that car before I came here, from my previous position. With what you worked at Riverside District before this, made $80,000 there according to public salary records. Lived in a house that cost $300,000. Had two kids in private school at $30,000 a year each. That's $60,000 for school alone. Where's the extra money coming from, Mr. Pemberton? Where does a public school superintendent get the money to live beyond his salary? This is harassment. You're under indictment. You shouldn't even be here. I'm a citizen. I have rights. Same as you, same as everyone in this room. Answer the question, where does the money come from? There's been a clerical error. An ongoing investigation will clarify everything. This is not the appropriate venue. November 2022, you authorized purchase of 40 gallons of floor wax from Silverline Supplies. I received 8 gallons. I have the delivery receipt. Where are the other 32 gallons? Dixon stood fully now, pointed at her. This is inappropriate, slanderous. My lawyer will hear about this. Elowen pulled a notebook from her bag, opened it. The same careful handwriting that had documented 34 years. October 2022. 32 light bulbs ordered from Silverline Supplies. 4 received December 2022. 15 gallons of cleaning solution ordered. 3 received every month, every order, same pattern, same company, and that company Silverline Supplies is owned by Howard Grayfield, who happens to be married to your wife's sister. Funny coincidence, don't you think? The room exploded, voices rising, questions shouted, phones coming out to record. The chairman banged his gavel, but the noise continued. Dixon's face had gone from red to white, from anger to something that looked like panic barely controlled. You're making accusations without proof. Slander, defamation. My lawyer will hear about this. You'll be sued for everything you have, which isn't much. Elowen closed the notebook carefully, looked at the board, at the audience, at the teachers who'd worked with her for decades. I'm not making accusations. I'm asking questions based on public records and my own documentation. But if you want to talk about proof, let's talk about the Teacher Retirement Fund. $2.1 million scheduled for transfer over the next 6 months. Small increments, $10,000 at a time. Where's that money going? Mr. Pemberton, which shell companies, which accounts? Who benefits when teachers who've worked their whole lives lose their pensions? He lunged forward across the table. Actually lunged. Pointed at her with a shaking hand while the board chairman tried to pull him back. You're going to prison. Do you understand that you'll die there? An old woman, alone, forgotten. No one will care. No one will remember your name. You'll be nothing but a number in an orange jumpsuit, and no one will give a damn because you're a thief and a liar and you're nothing. You're nobody. The room went silent, completely silent. 200 people holding their breath. Elowen looked at him. At this man who'd spent his life taking shortcuts and stealing from people who couldn't fight back, who thought power came from suits and titles and the ability to hurt people weaker than yourself. I've seen better men than you die, she said quietly, but her voice carried in the silence. In deserts, in wars that actually mattered. My son died serving this country. He was 24, had his whole life ahead of him, gave it up for people he'd never meet, for principles that mattered. And you steal from teachers, from people who spend their lives helping children for poverty wages. You're not just a thief, Mr. Pemberton. You're a coward, and everyone in this room knows it now. She turned, walked back to her seat, sat down between Colt and Wilder while the room erupted and Dixon shouted and the chairman banged his gavel until the handle cracked and had to be replaced mid-meeting. The meeting dissolved into chaos within minutes. The chairman called a recess. Dixon stormed out. Half the audience followed him shouting questions. The other half surrounded Elowen asking if she needed anything. Outside, after things had calmed down enough to leave, Elowen stood in the parking lot, surrounded by motorcycles and men who'd learned everything worth knowing from her. He's going to come at you harder now, Colt said quietly. He's going to try to destroy you faster. I know. He's got power, resources, lawyers. He can hurt you before we can stop him. Let him try. Mom, Wilder's voice was soft, worried in a way he rarely showed. He's dangerous now. You backed him into a corner, made him look bad in front of everyone. He's going to try to bury you. Elowen looked at her sons, at the men behind them, at the life she'd built from nothing but stubbornness and love and showing up every day regardless of how hard it was. "He can try," she said again. "But he picked the wrong woman. He thought I'd be easy because I'm old, because I'm poor, because I clean toilets for a living. He was wrong about all of it. And that's going to be the last mistake he ever makes." The call from the district attorney's office came the next morning, Wednesday. They were fast-tracking the trial. 2 weeks. Expedited schedule at the request of the prosecution, who cited public interest and the defendant's public statements as justification. Dixon Pemberton had friends, had lawyers, had the kind of connections that made things move when he wanted them to move. Elowen sat at her kitchen table reading the notice. Colt stood behind her reading over her shoulder, his jaw working the way it did when he was trying not to say something that would make things worse. 2 weeks isn't enough time, he said finally. It's the time we have. We need a lawyer. A real one. Not some overworked public defender who's got 40 cases and doesn't care about number 41. We need more than that. We need someone who believes me, someone who's willing to fight. The search for a lawyer took 3 days and ended in frustration. They contacted everyone they could find. Big firms said no, before hearing the details, didn't want to touch anything controversial. Small firms heard the details and said no anyway, didn't want to risk their reputations. Going up against a school superintendent with the backing of the district board and the district attorney's office wasn't good business. It was career suicide for a lawyer trying to build a practice. On the 4th day, Wilder came home with a name. Actually came home excited, which was rare for him. Maureen Caldwell, 60 years old, been practicing law for 35 years. Mostly civil rights cases, teachers' union disputes, wrongful termination suits. She knows the education system inside and out, knows where the bodies are buried. Will she take the case? She said she'll meet with you, wouldn't commit without talking to you first, wants to look you in the eye. They met at Maureen's office on Friday afternoon. The building was old, the kind that had been nice once back in the 60s and was now just holding on through maintenance and hope. The elevator made concerning noises that suggested imminent failure. The hallway smelled like old coffee and older carpet and the accumulated disappointments of people who'd walked these halls needing help. Maureen's office was different, though. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling, case files stacked in neat piles organized by year. A desk that looked like it had survived wars, both legal and actual. Behind it sat a woman with steel gray hair, pulled back tight in a bun, glasses on a chain around her neck, and eyes that had seen enough courtrooms to know which battles could be won and which were just expensive ways to lose. "Miss Blackwood, sit." It wasn't a request. Elowen sat. Colt started to follow her in. "Just her," Maureen said firmly. Colt hesitated, looked at his mother. Elowen nodded. He left, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. Maureen picked up a file. Elowen's file already. Someone had been doing research. She read through it with the speed of someone who could scan a legal document and catch every important detail, every potential problem. "You're 70 years old. Make $12 an hour. Been with the district 34 years. Accused of stealing $47,000 through fraudulent purchase orders over 3 years." She looked up, eyes sharp, assessing. "Did you do it?" "No." "Can you prove you didn't?" "I have 34 years of records. Every purchase I made, every delivery I received, all in notebooks I kept myself, handwritten, dated, detailed. The prosecution will say you fabricated them, made them up after the fact to cover your tracks. The paper is old. The ink is faded. Some of those notebooks are 20 years old. You can't fake that. The binding is coming apart on some of them. You can't age paper convincingly enough to fool experts." Maureen leaned back in her chair, studied Elowen the way a general studies a battlefield before committing troops. "You went to the school board meeting, confronted Pemberton publicly, made accusations about his finances and a shell company owned by his brother-in-law. I asked questions based on public information and my own records. You backed him into a corner, made him angry in front of 200 people. That was either very smart or very stupid. I haven't decided which yet. Angry people make mistakes. People who think they're smarter than everyone else can't resist proving it. I wanted him angry. I got what I wanted. But it also made this personal. He's not just trying to cover his theft now, he's trying to destroy you specifically. Personal vendettas get ugly in court. I know. Do you? Because personal vendettas mean he's got resources committed to this. He's got the DA's office. He's got a narrative that makes sense to people who don't look too close. Old woman, low income, been around forever, easy access to supplies, motive of needing money, opportunity through her position, means through her authority. That's a strong case built on assumptions that feel true. Then why are you still listening instead of showing me the door? Maureen smiled for the first time. Small, tight. The smile of a woman who'd spent her career fighting battles everyone said couldn't be won, and had won enough of them to know the odds didn't matter as much as the fight. Because I looked into Dixon Pemberton before you walked in here, did my own research, 3 previous school districts, Riverside, Lincoln, and Parkside. All of them had budget irregularities during his tenure. Nothing proven, nothing charged, but the pattern's there if you know where to look, and I've been doing this long enough to know where to look. She closed the file with a definitive snap. I'll take your case, not because I think we'll win easily. The odds are frankly terrible, but because I've been doing this long enough to know that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing. And sometimes old women who clean toilets know more about justice and integrity than men in expensive suits who've never done an honest day's work in their lives. What do you need from me? Everything, every notebook, every record, every receipt you've saved, every memory you have of the last 34 years. I need to know your life. I need to understand exactly what you did and how you did it. And I need you to trust me even when it looks like we're losing. Especially when it looks like we're losing. Can you do that? I raised 3 boys who weren't mine, who the world had given up on, taught them to stand when everything said to fall, taught them to fight when fighting seemed pointless. I can do anything if it needs doing. Good, because we're going to need that. Court date is set for 2 weeks from Monday. That gives us 18 days to build a defense against charges they've been building for months. We're starting behind, way behind, but we're going to finish ahead or die trying. The preparation was brutal. Maureen worked like a woman possessed, like she had something to prove to herself or the world. She took every notebook Elowen had all 34 years worth and photographed every page. Cross-referenced every entry with district purchase records pulled through Discovery. She found discrepancies everywhere she looked. Orders that didn't match. Deliveries that never arrived in the quantities claimed. Signatures that looked similar to Elowen's, but weren't quite right when you knew what to look for. She brought in a forensic document examiner, a woman named Dr. Patricia Wells, who'd spent 40 years testifying in courts about handwriting and forgery and the 1,000 ways people tried to fake signatures and usually failed if you knew what to look for. Dr. Wells spent 3 full days examining the purchase orders with equipment that looked like it belonged in a laboratory, comparing them to Elowen's real signatures on time cards and maintenance requests and 34 years of notebooks, looking at pressure patterns and ink flow and the muscle memory that creates a genuine signature versus the hesitation that comes from copying. Her conclusion was clear and unambiguous. The signatures on the fraudulent purchase orders were forgeries. Good ones. Professional ones done by someone with skill, but forgeries nonetheless. The pressure was wrong. The flow was wrong. The individual characteristics that made Elowen's signature unique were missing. The muscle memory that comes from signing your name thousands of times over decades was absent. But the prosecution had their own expert lined up, and their expert would say the opposite, would say the signatures were genuine, would say Elowen had signed those orders and was now lying about it to avoid prison. It would come down to who the jury believed, whose expert seemed more credible, whose story made more sense. While Maureen built the legal defense, assembled the evidence, prepared the witnesses, Colt and the Steel Covenant worked a different angle. They couldn't prove the retirement fund theft in court because the evidence came from hacking, which made it inadmissible and possibly got them arrested. But they could make noise, could ask questions, could make sure that when Dixon Pemberton walked into that courthouse, he knew he was being watched by people who didn't care about rules of evidence. Rook found Dale Henning through public records and old newspaper articles. The former accountant from Riverside District, where Pemberton had worked 5 years ago. The man was 65, retired, living in a modest house paid for by a pension that had somehow survived Pemberton's tenure, which made him either lucky or careful or both. I knew something was wrong, Dale said, sitting in his living room with Rook in cold hands, shaking slightly as he spoke. Numbers didn't add up. Purchase orders that seemed high for what we were getting. Vendors I'd never heard of charging premium prices. But when I raised questions, when I pushed for explanations, I was told I was being paranoid, too detail-oriented, making problems where there weren't any, making the superintendent's job harder. Did you push harder? Escalated. Once. Told the board I wanted to do a full audit. Wanted to bring in outside auditors to verify everything. Week later, I was called into a meeting, offered early retirement, very generous package, more than generous, enough to make me shut up and go away and never ask questions again. You took it. Dale looked down at his hands. Old hands. Ashamed hands. I had a wife with cancer. Stage 4, medical bills that would have bankrupted us even with insurance. They knew that. Offered me enough to pay for her treatment and experimental therapies and keep the house. What was I supposed to do? Let her die to be a hero, lose everything to prove a point. You were supposed to fight, Colt said, but his voice wasn't harsh, just sad. Easy to say when you're young and healthy and don't have someone you love dying in front of you while you watch helpless. Harder when you're choosing between justice and your wife's life. Rook put a hand on the old man's shoulder. Gentle, understanding. We're not judging you. We're asking if you'll testify now. Tell the court what you saw, what happened, what they offered you to stay quiet. Will it help Miss Blackwood? It'll show a pattern, show that Pemberton's done this before, show that framing people is his standard operating procedure when someone gets too close. Dale thought about it. His wife had died 3 years ago despite the treatments. The money was spent. All he had left was a house full of memories and the knowledge that he'd been bought, that he'd chosen survival over integrity and had regretted it every day since. I'll testify, he said finally, for whatever good it does, for whatever it's worth. I owe that much to the people I failed before. The morning of the trial, Elowen woke at 4:30 out of habit. Old habits. She'd been getting up at 4:30 for 34 years to get to work by 5. Body didn't know how to sleep past that anymore, even when there was no work to go to. She made coffee in the pot that was older than her son's. Sat at her kitchen table. Looked at the 3 chairs and thought about the boys who'd sat there. Who'd done homework and eaten cereal and learned what it meant to be men who kept their word. Colt found her there an hour later, sitting in the dark with cold coffee. You should eat something, he said. Not hungry. Eat anyway. Long day ahead, longer than you think. She ate toast because he asked, drank coffee because it was there. Let Colt fuss over her because it made him feel useful. And because she'd learned a long time ago that sometimes people needed to take care of you, even when you didn't need taking care of, just to feel like they were doing something. At 8 in the morning, they left for the courthouse. 25 motorcycles in perfect formation. A convoy that made people stop and stare and wonder what kind of trial warranted that kind of escort. The courthouse was old stone and tall windows and marble steps. Built in 1932 when people still believed that justice deserved impressive buildings, that architecture could inspire righteousness. The steps were marble worn smooth by 90 years of people walking up to face judgment. Elowen climbed them slowly, not because she was scared, not because she was tired, because she was savoring it. This moment, this choice, this stand she was taking. At the top she turned, looked at her sons, at the men behind them arranged like an honor guard. Stay here for now, she said. When I need you, I'll call, But let them think I'm alone first. Let them think I'm weak. Then we'll show them different. We should be inside, Colt protested. You will be, but not yet. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. Inside, the courtroom was already filling up. Reporters in the back rows with notebooks and recording devices. Community members who'd heard about the case and wanted to watch. Teachers from Jefferson Elementary wearing matching ribbons that said, "Justice for Elowin," in careful letters. Parents who remembered a janitor who'd fixed their kids' broken glasses with tape and superglue and heart because the family couldn't afford new ones. Dixon Pemberton sat at the prosecution table with his lawyers, 3 of them, expensive suits, leather briefcases that cost more than Elowin's monthly salary, the kind of legal firepower that cost more per hour than Elowin made in a week. Maureen sat alone at the defense table, 1 woman, 1 briefcase. 35 years of fighting battles no one thought she could win, and winning enough of them to keep fighting. Elowin joined her. They didn't speak, didn't need to. They'd said everything that needed saying over the past 2 weeks of preparation. The bailiff stood. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Holloway presiding. Judge Holloway entered from chambers. The same steel-haired woman who'd presided over the bail hearing. She looked at the packed courtroom, at the reporters, at the spectacle this had become, and her expression suggested she was deeply not pleased with any of it. Be seated. Before we begin, I want to make something very clear to everyone in this room. This is a court of law, not a circus, not a media event, not a platform for public opinion. I will tolerate no outbursts, no demonstrations, no disruptions of any kind. Anyone who cannot abide by those rules will be removed immediately and possibly charged with contempt. Are we clear? Silence answered her. Good. Prosecution, your opening statement. The lead prosecutor stood. Graham Hastings, 45 years old. Career prosecutor with the District Attorney's Office for 20 years. Record of convictions that would make any DEA proud. He walked to the jury box with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case he cared about, who knew how to tell a story that juries believed. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a simple case about a simple crime. Theft. The defendant, Elowin Blackwood, worked for Jefferson Elementary School for 34 years. During that time, she had authority to order supplies. She had access to purchase orders. She had the ability to sign for deliveries. She had the trust of everyone around her. And over a period of 3 years, she systematically abused that trust to steal $47,000 from the children of this community. He paused. Let that sink in. Let the jury picture children being robbed. We will show you purchase orders bearing her signature. We will show you deliveries she signed for. We will show you that the supplies ordered never reached the school in the quantities claimed. We will show you that Ms. Blackwood had motive through financial need. She had opportunity through her position. She had means through her authority. This is not a complicated case. It's theft, plain and simple, and we will prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. He sat down with the satisfied look of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and knew exactly how it would end. Maureen stood, took her time, let the courtroom settle. She was shorter than Hastings, older, wore a suit that had been nice once 10 years ago and was now just professional enough. But when she walked to that jury box, when she looked at those 12 people, something changed. The air shifted. The room paid attention in a different way. Mr. Hastings is right about one thing. This case is simple, but not in the way he thinks. Elowin Blackwood didn't steal $47,000. She couldn't have, because she's the one person who knew exactly what was being ordered, what was being delivered, and what was disappearing. She kept records, meticulous records, obsessive records, 34 years of records, and those records prove beyond any doubt that she's innocent. Maureen picked up one of the notebooks from the defense table, held it up so the jury could see it. This is from 1998. Look at it. Really look at it. The paper is yellowed with age. The ink is faded. The binding is literally coming apart. This is not something you can fake. This is not something you can create after the fact. This is a life's work. A career spent documenting every mop head, every light bulb, every gallon of floor wax. Why would someone who was stealing keep such detailed records? Why would someone who was guilty create evidence against themselves? Why would someone planning a crime document everything that could prove they didn't commit it? She set the notebook down gently on the jury rail. The answer is they wouldn't. Elowen Blackwood kept these records because she's honest, because she was raised to document her work and take pride in a job done right. Because 34 years ago, the army taught her that good records save lives and prevent mistakes. She didn't steal. She was framed by someone who needed a scapegoat. And over the next few days, we're going to prove exactly that. We're going to show you who really stole that money and why they chose to blame her. She sat down. The contrast was stark. Hastings had been confident. Maureen had been determined. The jury didn't know which story to believe yet. That was the whole point of a trial. The prosecution called their first witness, the district's current accountant, a young man named Kevin Marsh who'd been on the job for 8 months and looked nervous about testifying, kept adjusting his tie. He testified about the purchase orders in question, about the amounts that seemed correct on paper, about the signatures that appeared to match the signature cards on file for Elowen Blackwood, about the money that had been paid to Silverline Supplies for deliveries that never arrived at the school in the quantities claimed. On cross-examination, Maureen was gentle, almost kind, which made it worse. Mr. Marsh, how long have you worked for the school district? 8 months. So you weren't there when any of these purchases were actually made? No, ma'am. I started in March of this year. Did you personally verify any of these signatures yourself? Compare them to known exemplars? I compared them to the signature cards on file in the personnel office. Did you have them examined by a forensic document examiner? Someone trained to detect forgeries? No, that wasn't deemed necessary by the investigation. Did you investigate Silverline Supplies? Find out who owns it, where it's located, whether it's a legitimate company? That wasn't my job, ma'am. I was asked to compile the financial records for the prosecution. So you gathered the evidence they told you to gather. You didn't investigate independently. You didn't verify independently. You just did what you were told by people who'd already decided what the conclusion should be. I followed proper procedures for an internal audit. I'm sure you did, Mr. Marsh. I'm sure you did exactly what you were told. No further questions. The prosecution called more witnesses over the next day and a half. The shipping manager from a supply company who said he'd delivered materials to Jefferson Elementary and Elowen had signed for them. Under Maureen's cross-examination, he admitted he hadn't personally made any deliveries. His drivers had. And no, he didn't have records of which specific driver delivered which specific order. The signatures could have been from anyone. They called the former principal who'd retired 2 years ago, a woman named Margaret Donovan, who testified that Elowen had always been trustworthy, had always done excellent work, had never given any reason for concern in 20 years of working together. The prosecution tried to use this to show that Elowen had been trusted and had systematically betrayed that trust over years. Maureen flipped it on cross-examination to show that in 34 years, in thousands of transactions, Elowen had never once been dishonest or given anyone reason to doubt her integrity. By the end of the second day, the prosecution had presented their case. It looked strong on the surface, compelling if you didn't look too close. The kind of case that made juries nod and think they understood what had happened because it fit their expectations. Then Maureen called her first witness. Dr. Patricia Wells took the stand. She was 72 years old, had white hair pulled back in a neat bun, wore a simple suit, had steady hands and the calm demeanor of someone who'd testified in hundreds of trials and was not impressed by lawyers or judges or the theater of courtrooms. Maureen walked her through her credentials slowly, thoroughly. 40 years as a forensic document examiner, testimony in state and federal courts across the country, published papers on handwriting analysis and signature forgery in peer-reviewed journals, training for law enforcement agencies, expert witness in over 300 trials. Then Maureen handed her the purchase orders in question. Dr. Wells, have you had an opportunity to examine these documents? Yes, I examined them over a period of 3 days using standard forensic techniques. What did you find? the signatures attributed to Elowen Blackwood on these purchase orders are forgeries. The courtroom murmured. Judge Holloway's gavel came down once with a sharp crack. Silence returned immediately. How can you tell they're forgeries? Multiple factors observable to a trained examiner. First, the pressure patterns. A genuine signature has variable pressure throughout, light in some places where the hand moves quickly, heavy in others where it slows or emphasizes. These signatures have uniform pressure from beginning to end. That's completely consistent with someone copying a signature slowly and carefully, trying to match an exemplar rather than writing naturally. Dr. Wells pulled out enlarged photographs of the signatures. Second, the flow and rhythm. Natural handwriting flows smoothly. There's a rhythm to it created by muscle memory built over years. These signatures hesitate. You can see under magnification where the forger stopped and started trying to match the model. The pen lifts in unusual places. The strokes are drawn rather than written. She pointed to specific areas on the photographs. Third, the individual characteristics. Everyone has unique quirks in their handwriting developed over a lifetime. Small things, the way they cross a T or dot an I, the angle of certain letters, the connections between letters. Ms. Blackwood's genuine signatures show these quirks consistently. The forgeries don't. Someone tried to copy her signature but didn't understand or couldn't replicate the underlying mechanics that make it unique. In your professional opinion, based on 40 years of experience, did Elowen Blackwood sign these purchase orders? No, she absolutely did not. These are competent forgeries, but they are definitively forgeries. On cross-examination, Hastings tried to shake her, tried to create doubt, brought up the prosecution's own expert who'd examined the same signatures and reached the opposite conclusion. Dr. Wells smiled slightly. Patient, almost amused. Mr. Hastings, I've been doing this for 40 years. I've testified against the FBI's own handwriting experts and prevailed because the evidence supported my conclusions. Your expert, Dr. Morrison, is competent in his field. I've read his CV, but he's wrong in this case. And if you'd like, I can show the jury exactly where and why he's wrong, using the same forensic techniques that courts have relied on for decades. Hastings declined the offer, sat down looking less confident than when he'd stood up. Next, Maureen called Elowen herself. She walked to the stand slowly, deliberately, not from fear or hesitation, from the understanding that she'd waited 2 weeks for this moment and wasn't going to rush it. This was her chance to speak, to be heard, to tell her story. The bailiff swore her in. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Sat down in the witness chair. Looked at the jury. 12 men and women from the county who would decide if she spent her remaining years in prison or went home to the life she'd built. Maureen began gently, respectfully. Ms. Blackwood, how long did you work for Jefferson Elementary School? 34 years, from 1990 to 3 weeks ago when I was arrested. What was your job there? Custodian. I cleaned floors and bathrooms, fixed things that broke, kept the building running and maintained, made sure children had a safe, clean place to learn. Did you have authority to order supplies as part of that job? Yes. Small purchases, cleaning supplies, maintenance materials, light bulbs, the things the school needed to operate day to day. How did you keep track of what you ordered? I wrote it down. Every single purchase, every delivery, every item. I kept notebooks with detailed records. Why did you do that? Why keep such detailed records when it wasn't required? Because that's what I was taught. In the army, when I was a medic, we documented everything. Good records keep people honest, keep things running smoothly, prevent mistakes and confusion. I carried that discipline with me when I left the service. It's just how I work. Maureen picked up the stack of 34 notebooks, carried them to the witness stand. Are these your records, Ms. Blackwood? Yes, ma'am, every one of them. All 34 years worth. Yes, from my first day to my last day before the arrest. Maureen opened one at random. Can you explain this entry from June 15th, 2015? Elowen looked at it. That's 12 gallons of floor wax industrial grade delivered at 7:45 a.m. by Thompson Supply. I signed for it personally. Used 10 gallons that month, stored 2 in the supply closet for July. You remember that specific delivery from 9 years ago? No, ma'am, but I wrote it down when it happened. That's the point of records. So you don't have to remember, so the truth is preserved. Miss Blackwood, did you steal $47,000 from Jefferson Elementary School? No, I did not. Did you create false purchase orders? No. Did you sign for deliveries you never received? No, never. Then how do you explain the evidence the prosecution has presented? The purchase orders with your signature. Elowen looked directly at the jury, spoke to them like they were sitting at her kitchen table, like they were her neighbors, like they deserved respect and honesty. Someone changed the numbers on the orders after I signed them, or forged my signature on completely new orders. I'd order 12 gallons of wax like I wrote in my notebook. They'd change it to 40 on the official order and pocket the difference. I'd order 4 light bulbs. They'd change it to 32 and steal the rest. Small amounts each time, spread out over months and years. Hard to notice unless you're looking closely at the patterns. But I noticed because I keep records, because I know my work, and because I knew something was wrong long before they accused me. When did you first suspect something was wrong? About 2 years ago. Budget kept going up according to the reports I saw, but supplies kept getting scarcer. Didn't make sense. Higher budget should mean more supplies, not less. I mentioned it to Principal Hartley. She said she'd look into it. Nothing changed. Then Dixon Pemberton became superintendent. Budget went up even more. Supplies got even scarcer. I mentioned it again through official channels. 3 weeks later, I got the letter accusing me of theft. What did you think when you received that letter? That I'd been framed. That someone had been stealing and needed someone to blame. That they picked me because I'm old and poor and they thought I'd be easy. Thought nobody would believe me over a superintendent with credentials and expensive suits. Were they right about that? Elowen smiled, the same smile that wasn't quite nice, the same smile she'd shown Dixon Pemberton. They picked the wrong woman. I may be old, I may be poor, but I'm not easy, and I'm not wrong. Hastings stood for cross-examination. He was good, experienced, professional. He knew how to take a sympathetic witness and make them look guilty through implications and careful questions. Ms. Blackwood, you claim you didn't steal this money, that you were framed. I didn't claim anything. I stated facts. I didn't steal. I was framed. Those are facts, not claims. But you had access to the purchase order system, correct? So did 20 other people. The principal, assistant principal, office manager, other staff with authorization. But you're the one who primarily ordered supplies, aren't you? I ordered the supplies we actually needed based on usage, not the supplies that appeared on fraudulent orders. These notebooks you keep, how do we know you didn't create them recently, after you were accused to support your defense? Look at the paper, Mr. Hastings. Really look at it. I'm 70 years old. I make $12 an hour. Do you honestly think I have the resources, the skill, the equipment to forge 20-year-old notebooks, to age paper convincingly, to match ink that's been sitting in those books for decades? That's absurd and you know it. I think you're a smart woman, smart enough to plan ahead if you were going to commit fraud. If I were planning to steal $47,000, Mr. Hastings, I wouldn't keep detailed records of every single item I didn't steal. That would be the stupidest criminal plan in history. I'd destroy records, not create them. And whatever else I may be, I'm not stupid. Hastings changed tactics, tried a different angle. You confronted Mr. Pemberton at a school board meeting, made public accusations about his finances and his brother-in-law's company. I asked questions based on public records and observable facts. That's not an accusation, that's civic participation. You accused him of driving a car he couldn't afford on his salary. I asked where the money came from to purchase a $60,000 vehicle on a $95,000 salary after taxes when he has other significant expenses. That's a mathematical question, not an accusation. If he has a good answer, he should provide it. You mentioned his brother-in-law, Howard Grayfield, and Silverline Supplies. Silverline Supplies is the company that's been billing the district 3 times market rate for supplies I never received in the quantities they claim. Howard Grayfield owns that company. That's public record available through Delaware corporate filings. Mr. Grayfield is married to Mr. Pemberton's sister-in-law. That's also public record. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm stating facts and asking questions about those facts. You're trying to deflect blame from yourself onto Mr. Pemberton. I'm trying to tell the truth. If that truth deflects blame from an innocent person to a guilty person, then good. That's how justice is supposed to work. Hastings tried for another hour, tried to trap her in contradictions, tried to make her angry or flustered, tried to make her look like a bitter old woman with a grudge against authority. Elowen didn't give him anything, just answered questions calmly with the patience of someone who knew she was right and was willing to wait for everyone else to catch up to that reality. When Hastings finally sat down looking frustrated and slightly defeated, Maureen called her next witness. The defense calls Briar Ashford. Briar walked to the stand like she was walking to her own execution. 28 years old, mother of 2, accountant for a school district that was probably going to fire her for this testimony. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry, looked terrified. She swore in, sat down, looked at Maureen with eyes that asked silently if this was really necessary, if there was any other way. Maureen's eyes answered back, yes, it's necessary. Miss Ashford, what is your position with the school district? I'm an accountant. I manage financial records, process payments, reconcile accounts. How long have you held this position? 8 months. I started in March. In that time, did you notice any irregularities in the financial records? Yes. Her voice was quiet. She cleared her throat, tried again louder. Yes, I did. What kind of irregularities? Purchase orders that didn't match actual invoices from vendors, amounts that seemed unreasonably high for basic supplies, patterns that didn't make sense when compared to previous year's spending. What did you do when you noticed these irregularities? I ran an unofficial audit on my own time, after work, used the district's financial database to trace patterns over the past 3 years. What did you find? A clear pattern. Every inflated order, every questionable purchase went through one company, Silverline Supplies. I traced the company registration through Delaware public records, found that it's owned by Howard Grayfield. Who is Howard Grayfield to you? I don't know him personally, but according to public records and basic research, he's Dixon Pemberton's brother-in-law, married to the superintendent's wife's younger sister. The courtroom erupted into noise, people talking, reporters scribbling, phones coming out despite the judge's earlier warning. Judge Holloway's gavel slammed down 3 times in rapid succession before order was restored. What did you do with this information once you discovered it? I reported it to Mr. Pemberton. I thought it was a mistake, some kind of accounting error. I thought he'd want to know that a vendor was potentially overcharging us or that there was confusion in the ordering system. What did Mr. Pemberton say when you reported this to him? Briar's voice shook. He said I was new, that I didn't understand how school budgets worked, that vendor pricing was complicated and not my concern, that if I kept making baseless accusations without understanding the full context, I'd find myself unemployed. He was very clear about the threat. Did you believe he was threatening your job? Yes, absolutely. As a single mother with 2 young children, I couldn't afford to lose my job. I have rent, childcare, medical expenses. I was scared. Why didn't you report it to someone else, the school board, the police, anyone? Briar's eyes filled with tears. Because I have 2 daughters, ages 6 and 4. I'm their only parent. Their father isn't in the picture. If I lose my job, we lose our apartment. We lose stability. I was terrified of making waves, terrified of being wrong, terrified of the consequences. What made you decide to come forward now to testify despite those fears? Wilder Blackwood found me, told me about his mother, about what she'd done for him and his brothers when they had nobody else. asked me what I wanted to teach my daughters about courage and integrity and doing the right thing when it's hard. I realized I wanted to teach them that you stand up for truth even when it costs you something, even when you're scared, even when it's easier to stay silent. She pulled a USB drive from her purse, handed it to Maureen with shaking hands. This contains 200 pages of financial records I compiled. Purchase orders, vendor invoices, payment records, bank transfer documentation, everything showing the pattern of fraud over the past 3 years. It proves that Elowen Blackwood didn't steal anything. It proves someone else did, and it proves they framed her to protect themselves. Maureen entered the records into evidence over Hastings' objections. Judge Holloway allowed it. The jury received copies to review. For the next 90 minutes, Maureen walked Breyer through the financial records in painstaking detail. Showed the pattern of inflation, showed how $47,000 was just the amount they'd blamed on Elowen, showed how $340,000 had actually been stolen through fake invoices and shell companies over 3 years. On cross-examination, Hastings attacked her credibility hard, suggested she was lying to keep her job, suggested she'd fabricated records, suggested she was in league with the defendant. Breyer didn't budge. Her voice got stronger as she answered. I'm losing my job by being here, Mr. Hastings. Mr. Pemberton will make absolutely certain of that. He has that power. I'm not doing this to save myself or my career. I'm doing it because it's right, because an innocent woman is being railroaded, and I have information that proves it, and because I want my daughters to know their mother stood up when it mattered. The final witness was Dale Henning, 65 years old, retired accountant. White hair, trembling hands, carried the weight of old guilt on his shoulders like a physical burden. He testified about Riverside District 5 years ago, about noticing similar irregularities when Dixon Pemberton worked there as assistant superintendent, about purchase orders that didn't match reality, about vendors charging premium prices for basic supplies. How much money went missing at Riverside during Mr. Pemberton's tenure? I estimated approximately $180,000 over 2 years. Same pattern we're seeing here. Inflated purchase orders, shell companies, small amounts per transaction that added up to major theft over time. Did you report these irregularities? I tried. I really tried. Told my supervisor, told the board president, was told I was being paranoid, that I was too focused on details and missing the bigger picture, that I was making trouble unnecessarily. What happened when you pushed for a full audit? 1 week later, I was called into a private meeting, offered early retirement. The package was extraordinarily generous, more generous than normal early retirement packages, enough to make most problems go away. Did you take it? Dale's voice broke. Yes, I took it. My wife had stage 4 cancer. We had medical bills over $300,000, even with insurance, experimental treatments. Specialists, I needed the money to try to save her life. They knew that. They used that. Offered me enough to pay for everything and keep the house. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to fight, Maureen said gently. But we understand why you didn't. We're not here to judge you, Mr. Henning. We're here to learn from what happened. On cross-examination, Hastings tried to destroy him, called him a coward, suggested he was lying now out of guilt, suggested he'd fabricated everything. Dale took it all, sat there and absorbed the verbal assault, then answered quietly. You can call me whatever names you want, Mr. Hastings. You'd probably be right about most of them. But I'm a coward who's telling the truth. Nothing you say changes the fact that Dixon Pemberton has done this before, that he has a pattern of stealing from school districts and framing innocent people when they get too close, that he'll keep doing it until someone stops him. Ms. Blackwood is trying to stop him. I'm trying to help her because I failed to stop him before and people suffered for my cowardice. The prosecution rested. The defense rested. The judge called a recess before closing arguments. During the break, something happened. Something unexpected. The courtroom doors opened. 25 men walked in. Steel Covenant MC. They'd been waiting outside all day. Now they filed in silently, sat in the back rows, leather and patches and the physical presence of men who decided this mattered. Judge Holloway noticed, raised an eyebrow. said nothing. If they stayed quiet, they could stay. Closing arguments began. Hastings went first for the prosecution, tried to refocus the jury on the original charges, on the purchase orders with Elowen's signature, on the simple narrative that made sense if you didn't look at any of the evidence the defense had presented. Ladies and gentlemen, don't be distracted by conspiracy theories and complicated financial schemes. The case is simple. Purchase orders with the defendant's signature, supplies that never arrived, money that disappeared. That's theft. That's what we charged. That's what the evidence proves. He sat down. Maureen stood for the defense closing. She didn't go to the jury box immediately. Instead, she picked up all 34 notebooks, carried them over, set them carefully on the jury rail where everyone could see them. Elowen Blackwood is 70 years old. She's worked for 34 years, making $12 an hour. She raised 3 boys who weren't biologically hers on that salary. She sold her truck to afford food. She wore the same jacket for 20 years. She kept every single receipt, documented every single purchase, did everything right according to rules she learned in the army and carried with her for 4 decades. She touched the notebooks gently. And when she noticed something was wrong, when numbers stopped making sense, she reported it through official channels. She did what she was supposed to do. For that, she was arrested, charged with crimes she didn't commit, brought here to defend a life's work against accusations made by the very man who's actually guilty. She picked up one notebook, held it up. These are not evidence of guilt. These are evidence of innocence. No one who's stealing keeps records this detailed. No one who's guilty creates proof against themselves. Elowen Blackwood kept these records because she's honest, because she was taught to do things right, because documentation and integrity matter, because that's who she is at her core. She set the notebook down. The prosecution wants you to believe that a 70-year-old janitor orchestrated a complex fraud scheme involving shell companies and forged documents and careful planning over 3 years. But the evidence shows something completely different. It shows that Dixon Pemberton has been stealing from school districts for years, multiple districts, multiple victims, that he set up shell companies through his brother-in-law, that he systematically inflated purchase orders and pocketed the difference, that when Elowen Blackwood noticed and reported it, he framed her to protect himself, to make sure nobody looked deeper, to destroy her credibility before she could destroy his career. She walked slowly along the jury box, made eye contact with each juror. He picked her because she's old, because she's poor, because she cleans toilets for a living, because he thought she'd be easy to blame and easy to break. He thought wrong. Elowen Blackwood is not easy to break. She's a veteran who served her country, a mother who raised children nobody else wanted, a woman who spent her entire life fixing things other people ignored or broke. And she's innocent. The evidence proves it beyond any doubt. Your job now is to see that justice is actually done, to stand up for truth even when it's easier to believe the simple story, to protect an innocent woman from a guilty man who has power and money and no conscience whatsoever. She paused. Let that hang in the air. 40 years ago, when Elowen Blackwood was serving in the army as a medic, she learned something important. She learned that sometimes the system gets things wrong, that sometimes innocent people need someone to stand up for them, that sometimes doing the right thing is hard. Today, right now, you are that someone. You're the ones who can stand up, who can do the right thing, who can make sure justice is done. Please, stand up for Elowen Blackwood. She spent her life standing up for others. Now it's our turn to stand up for her. Maureen sat down. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. 7 hours while Elowen sat in the courtroom with her sons, who'd come inside finally. Waiting, not speaking, just being together the way families do when words aren't enough and presence is everything. At 5:45 in the afternoon, just when the judge was considering sequestering the jury overnight, the bailiff emerged from the deliberation room. Juries reached a verdict. They filed back in, 12 faces that showed nothing, gave nothing away. The foreman stood with a piece of paper. Judge Holloway addressed him. Has the jury reached a verdict in this matter? We have, Your Honor. In the case of the state versus Elowen Blackwood on the charge of embezzlement of public funds, how do you find the defendant? We find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of theft by fraud, how do you find? Not guilty. On all related charges. Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor. The courtroom didn't just erupt. It exploded. Teachers jumping up, parents cheering, the 25 men of Steel Covenant MC standing as one, a show of solidarity and strength. Elowen sat very still, processing. Then Colt grabbed her. Wilder grabbed them both. Rook stood behind them with both hands on his mother's shoulders. Judge Holloway banged her gavel repeatedly. When order finally returned, when people sat back down, she looked directly at Elowen. Miss Blackwood, you are free to go. All charges are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they cannot be brought again. Your record will be expunged. She paused, then looked at the prosecution table where Dixon Pemberton sat with his lawyers, looking pale and shaken. And I am referring this entire matter to the Attorney General's office for immediate investigation into the allegations made during this trial regarding fraud, embezzlement, and related crimes. Mr. Pemberton, I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel. Dixon Pemberton was already standing to leave, already trying to slip out the side door. But FBI agents were there, had been sitting in the back of the courtroom the entire time, listening, taking notes, building their own case based on everything that had been said under oath. Dixon Pemberton, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and theft of federal education funds. He tried to run anyway, made it 5 steps, found 25 men from Steel Covenant MC blocking his path, not touching him, not threatening him, just standing, an immovable wall of leather and muscle and absolute determination. The agents cuffed him, read him his rights, the same rights he'd watched them read to Elowen weeks ago. They led him past Elowen's table. He stopped, looked at her, this woman he'd tried to destroy. Please, he whispered. I have a family, a wife, children, please. Elowen looked at him for a long moment, really looked, saw him clearly for what he was. A small man who'd spent his life taking shortcuts and stealing from people who couldn't fight back. I have a family too, she said quietly but firmly. 3 sons I raised on $12 an hour while you were stealing from teachers and children. You tried to take them from me, tried to put me in prison so you could keep stealing. You're not just a thief, Mr. Pemberton. You're worse. You steal from people who've given everything and ask for nothing in return. From people who dedicate their lives to children. You don't deserve my mercy. She turned away. Take him out of here. I'm done looking at him. They led Dixon Pemberton away, out of the courthouse, into a car that would take him to a cell where he'd wait for his own trial, a trial that would end very differently than Elowen's. Outside, the sun was setting. The sky was orange and purple and gold, beautiful in the way that endings sometimes are when they're also beginnings. The motorcycles were still there, 25 of them, men who'd waited all day for their family to come home. Elowen walked down the courthouse steps, the marble steps that had been there for 90 years. Her sons around her, men who'd been boys once, broken boys, lost boys, thrown away boys, boys who'd found a mother in a woman who cleaned toilets and fixed broken things and never ever gave up on people. At the bottom of the steps, a crowd was waiting. Teachers from Jefferson Elementary, parents, former students, people who remembered kindness, who remembered a janitor who'd fixed their kids' broken glasses or bought them lunch when they'd forgotten theirs or just listened when they needed someone to listen and care. They applauded, a wave of sound that rolled over everything, 200 people showing respect and gratitude and recognition. Elowen stopped, looked at them, nodded once, small, dignified. That was enough. She didn't need more. She walked to Wilder's truck, the one he'd bought her years ago, the one she'd kept running through stubbornness and skill and YouTube videos when she couldn't afford a mechanic. They drove home together, Elowen in front, Colt, Wilder, and Rook following in their vehicles, the motorcycles surrounding them like an honor guard all the way back to Maple Street. 2 weeks later, Dixon Pemberton pleaded guilty to avoid a trial he knew he'd lose. The evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were credible. His lawyer advised him that a plea deal was his only hope of avoiding decades in prison. He got 18 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. Full restitution of $2.4 million traced through various accounts and schemes. His teaching credentials revoked. His pension forfeited. Howard Grayfield got 12 years as an accomplice. Silver Line Supplies was dissolved. The money was recovered and returned. 3 other school districts opened investigations into budget irregularities during Pemberton's previous tenures. 7 more officials were arrested in a widening scandal that made national news. The teacher retirement fund was fully restored. 140 teachers kept their pensions, kept their futures. Elowen didn't attend the sentencing, didn't need to see it, didn't need the closure. Justice had been done. That was enough for her. Instead, she went back to Jefferson Elementary. Not to work. She'd retired officially now, but to visit, to see the building she'd kept running for 34 years. The new principal met her at the door, a young woman named Rebecca Chen, who'd been teaching 3rd grade when Elowen was arrested. "Miss Blackwood, the board wants to honor you. A plaque in the main hallway, maybe name the new library wing after you. Something to recognize what you did, what you went through." "No, thank you. I appreciate the thought, but no." "But you deserve recognition. You deserve to be remembered." "I did my job, that's all. For 34 years, I did my job right. Don't need a plaque to prove that. Don't need my name on a building. Just did what needed doing." She walked through the halls one last time. Ran her hand along walls she'd painted. Looked at floors she'd cleaned thousands of times. Smiled at the building that had been her second home, her purpose, her life's work. In the gymnasium where she'd found Colt 26 years ago, she stopped. Stood in the center, remembered. Her sons found her there. They'd come without being asked, were waiting because they knew she'd want to see this place one more time. "You ready to go home, Mom?" Colt asked. Yeah, I am." They walked out together, got into vehicles, drove back to the house on Maple Street. At home, they sat around the kitchen table, 3 chairs that didn't match, 3 sons who weren't related by blood, 1 mother who'd chosen them all. "You did good," Colt said. "We all did good, all of us together. What now? What comes next?" Elowen smiled, poured a coffee from the pot that was older than her son's. Looked at the men her boys had become. "Now we live. We work. We help people who need helping. Same as always. Same as we've always done." "The Steel Covenant wants to start a foundation," Colt said. "Scholarships for foster kids. Kids aging out of the system. Give them chances they wouldn't otherwise have." "That's good. That's real good." "We want to name it after you. The Elowen Blackwood Foundation. Name it after yourselves. You're the ones who made something from nothing, who proved that thrown-away kids can build good lives. We learned that from you, Mom. Then you learned well, and that's all that matters." They drank coffee, talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. About family and work and the kind of life that didn't need plaques or recognition because the reward was in the doing, in the showing up, in the loving people when it was hard. Outside, 25 motorcycles were parked in neat formation. Men who'd learned that family wasn't about blood or DNA or legal documents. It was about showing up, about keeping promises, about standing with people when they needed you to stand regardless of the cost. Elowen looked at her sons, at the life they'd built together from broken pieces and second chances, and refusing to give up. "I'm proud of you," she said. "All 3 of you. You turned out to be good men." "You raised us right," Rook said, his voice quiet but certain. "I raised you honest. I raised you to stand up. The rest you did yourselves." The sun set, the kitchen filled with golden evening light. And Elowen Blackwood, 71 years old veteran mother janitor fighter, sat at her table with her sons and knew that whatever else happened in the years she had left, this moment was enough. She'd stood when they tried to knock her down, fought when they expected her to break, won when they thought she'd lose. Not because she was special, but because 70 years had taught her that the world doesn't care about your circumstances or your disadvantages or how hard things are. The world cares about what you do when everything says quit. And Elowen Blackwood had never learned how to quit. Not when her husband died young. Not when Daniel was killed in Iraq. Not when 3 broken boys needed a mother. Not when a man in an expensive suit tried to frame her for crimes he committed. She stood, she fought, she won. That's what you do when you're raised right. When you understand that honor matters more than comfort. That doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. That integrity isn't something you have when it's convenient. It's something you hold on to when holding on costs you everything. That's what she'd learned. That's what she'd taught. That's what her sons would carry forward into whatever came next. The story didn't end with a courtroom victory or a guilty man going to prison. It ended here, in a kitchen, around a table, with family, because that's what mattered in the end. Not the fights you won, not the enemies you defeated, the people you fought for, the people you loved, the people you showed up for day after day regardless of how hard it got. Elowen had fought for 3 boys who needed her. They'd fought for her when she needed them. That was justice. Real justice, the kind that mattered beyond courtrooms and legal systems and everything else. She finished her coffee, stood, washed the mug the way she'd been washing mugs for 40 years. Behind her, her sons cleaned up, put away chairs, wiped down the table, did the small things that make a house a home and a family a family. Outside, engines started. Men heading back to their lives, to their families, to the work that waited. But they'd come when called, would come again if needed. That was the promise. That was the bond they'd forged. Elowen walked to the porch, watched the motorcycles pull away one by one, raised her hand in farewell to men who'd shown up for her the way she'd shown up for her sons. The last bike to leave was Colt's. He stopped at the end of the driveway, looked back. She waved. He waved back, then rode into the night with his brothers. Elowen stood on her porch. 40 years in this house, this street, this life built from stubbornness and love and showing up every single day. She'd won her fight, but more important, she'd stood. And sometimes standing is enough. Sometimes standing is everything. Tomorrow she'd wake at 4:30 like always. Make coffee like always. Figure out what came next like always. But tonight she'd sleep in her own bed. Free. Vindicated. Home. Surrounded by the life she'd built and the family she'd chosen and the knowledge that she'd done right when doing right was hard. And that was everything.